This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, guys. I was right on cue.
You were right on cue. Though I can't tell because Michelle's internet is terrible today.
God, it's just the worst.
So sometimes I'm just sitting here going, I'm sure she's talking.
It is a podcast, after all.
I know. It is a podcast, so one imagines she's talking. And that's all you have to do. You can only imagine it, since you never see us. Which is why our hand gestures are meaningless. No, I'm joking. Weird model and introduction. Anyway, we are talking today about something that I would say is, I don't know, halfway skill, halfway concept. So much of DBT is so, regimented, so structured, so precise, so step 1, step 2, step 3. And this is less that.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of nice. But it does mean, today's episode I'm going to say is a little bit more freeform.
I would agree with that.
Many of them will be. Which I find fascinating because I am waiting to see if this means Michelle and I talk more or less.
Who knows,
We'll
folks?
see. Who knows? Stay tuned.
Keep listening.
To see how long this episode is. Also, I'm so sorry. I just had lunch. Apparently, I just need to clear my throat 1,800 times, so my apologies.
I need to clear my throat, too. I'm going to do it right now. I legitimately did.
And I know, and I sound like I'm trying to interrupt you, even when I'm talking. Anyway, Michelle, no. So, the thing we're talking about today has kind of two different names, and Michelle and I, talking about it before the episode, realized that she's going to be talking about it more in one regard, and I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more in the other, so it kind of works well. The two terms that this thing goes by are ride the wave or urge surfing. And yeah, it's useful when high emotions, start to drive the bus. A lot of this can look like, well, as the name urge surfing might have indicated, resisting urges for ways that we might act, especially self-destructive ways that we might act in the midst of high emotions. But also it can just to be about, my terrible Italian accent. No, it can also just be about, letting an emotion rise, peak, and fall so that, you can find your wise mind a little bit more easily, right? It can be really hard to find our wise mind at the peak of an emotional experience.
Oh, yes.
Somewhere between extraordinarily difficult and impossible.
Yeah.
So you might have to engage with this concept / skill a little bit when you're needing to seek out your wise mind in particularly tough or especially emotional situations. So.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm not even sure what module this falls under because I do remember this being talked about back when I was taking the girls who lived at Phoenix House to DBT groups. Like this was a thing that I think was talked about more in the first manual, but I looked in the 2015 second edition manual that Kate and I use and lots of other DBT facilitators use, and I looked in the glossary for Ride the Wave and I couldn't find anything.
Really?
Yeah, I couldn't find anything. I'm guessing it's in the emotion regulation module. It's got to be. But there's a reason why we haven't talked about this skill up until this point because, again, it doesn't have a ton of direction. And where is it? It just hides somewhere in the DBT
I remember
void.
being taught it too. I mean, but that was number of years ago.
Yeah.
17 years ago that I went through DBT.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
Yep.
But I remember being taught it.
Yeah. So it seemed important to include it somewhere in the podcast, but there's a reason why this is maybe coming more towards the end after we've worked through a lot of the other skills, because it's often forgotten about or not talked about as much. And yeah, I think a lot of people really like this skill and gain a lot from using it.
I think this is one of the more, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, Michelle, but I think this is one of the DBT skills that gets utilized more by non-DBT people.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot of therapists and people are aware of the skill that are not DBT focused, oriented, what have you. I think this one is a broadly applied skill.
Yes, I would totally agree with that. And I'm already bracing to talk a lot. I just feel it. I'm about to talk a lot. So, right, like with this idea of ride the wave or urge surfing, I was really first introduced to this idea when I was getting trained to work at Phoenix House. And it wasn't talked about in the context of DBT, as you were just saying, Kate. Because I had to go through this 2-day training that basically, I mean, it encompassed a lot of things, but it was all about de-escalation. So when you are in the presence of someone, whether it's a child, teenager, adult, whoever, and they are escalating, how do you bring them back down? And that was where I learned something that we shared on a previous Q&A episode with the person in Australia who was working in the mental health unit at a hospital, I think, of like to not say the word calm down, like to not say that phrase, and to keep your commands 5 words or less. There were lots of different strategies that we talked about in this training, including how to put people in literal physical holds if they were coming at you to assault you. Because that was definitely a thing that I had to use if a girl was coming to punch me. Oh, yeah.
Wait, did you ever have to use it?
Oh, yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I had to use holds fairly often, mostly 2-person holds, where we were trained in how to, like, basically get someone on the ground safely or how to get them up against the wall. Thankfully, I never had to use the skills I learned to get out of having my hair being pulled or to get out of being bit. I never got bit, and of that I was very proud.
Did you ever get punched, or were you always able to restrain them?
I'm totally going off on a...
I know,
totally but I want to. Okay, so there was one day where it was snowy out, and we had this one girl. She was like the youngest girl we had. She was like 11, but she was a bigger girl for her age. I mean, I'm pretty small. I'm 5'1". She was taller than me. Okay. And she was having a day. Things were not going well. And she went outside, and we had, I don't even know why we had them. Nobody used them, but we had these patio chairs.
Oh, yeah.
And she picked up one of the chairs, and she was about to come at me with this chair. I mean, it was pretty scary. And a voice came out of me that I've never heard before. And I said her name, and I said, "Put the chair down." But I said it in this tone of voice I didn't even know that I had. And she did. Otherwise, I think I probably would have gotten fucked up that night. And I would have gotten pretty hurt. I had a girl put a pencil against my throat once, trying to be threatening. You know. But I did have a girl punch me the arm once, but that was not too bad. Like, I don't know. I was relatively unscathed.
Someday I'm going to have to get more of these stories. I realize there's a lot I don't know about that.
Yeah, they are some pretty good stories. I'm not even going to lie. They are good stories. So, back to what we're, I guess, here to talk about. So I was in this training, and we talked about how it works when people get escalated and then how to bring them down. And the general neuroscience behind this is that, right, something happens, an event, there's a trigger. There's always a trigger. Something happens that is the cause of this person escalating. Sometimes it's really hard because some triggers are super obvious. Some triggers are very subtle. A trigger might be somebody having a thought about something or having a memory. Well, you can't see that, you know?
Yeah, you aren't always on the outside. You may not know what the trigger is.
You may not know what the trigger is, but someone has a trigger And then basically there's kind of this ramping up period. And we talked a lot about this working at the group home of like, that's the time to try some of these strategies. Like try to notice a person's cues when they're getting a little agitated or something's happening, where they're starting to get overwhelmed. And that's the time to try to intervene. So there's this ramping up and then you reach the peak. If you try something in the ramping up stage and it doesn't work, then the emotion is only going to build. They're only going to escalate more, and they're going to eventually reach this peak. The peak is when they are punching you in the arm or whatever it is. Like, that's when they're at their peak. That's normally what we would have to put them in a hold, is because they're about to harm themselves, another girl, us, whatever it is. So things reach this breaking point. You know, they're throwing something. That's the peak. And then a lot of times people come down remarkably quickly. Not always, but sometimes. Like that, I'm thinking of the girl who punched me in the arm, because that was like my first week and I was driving and she punched me in the arm. And again, it didn't hurt all that bad, but I was just shocked. And I just looked at her and I said her name and I was like, ah! You know, and she just immediately, like, as soon as she punched me, she was done. It was crazy, you know, like.
That is intense.
She did the thing that she wanted to do, and then she was done. And this is what would happen a lot of times when girls would have to be put in holds. Is not always, I mean, they would a lot of times try to fight to get out of the hold. They didn't normally have to be in a hold for more than 2 minutes. That would be a long time to be in a hold. And they would calm down, because they did the peak thing to get into the hold, if that makes sense. They threw the thing they wanted to throw. They, you know, grabbed the knife from the kitchen that they were wanting to grab, which we had to have those locked up like 3 different ways. So if a girl got a knife, that was because we had done something terribly wrong as staff, by leaving something unlocked or leaving it on the counter stupidly or something. But they would come down immediately. And then once you've gotten to the peak and you drop down, there's this period of exhaustion. A lot of the time they would call it, where like you almost dip below your baseline. You're going to be really tired, actually.
Like wrung out.
Yeah. Which is why, I mean, I'm guessing for most of our listeners, I can think of it for myself. When you have something really intense happen, once it's done, like, you're done. Like, you're just wiped out.
Like a bit of an adrenaline crash, right?
Oh, yeah. It completely is that. Of like, your brain was doing all this work and firing all these chemicals to respond to this trigger, whatever it was. And then once you've reached that peak and you come down from it, your body really dips so that you can replenish and then get back to your baseline, normal, I'm chill, neutral, calm place. So there really is, literally, when we're talking about this idea of riding the wave, I say all this to say there is a wave. That regardless of what the circumstances are, regardless of what the trigger is, regardless of what it looks like when we are each ramping up or when we reach the peak or when it drops, and it's a pretty steep drop a lot of the time, where like, again, you can come down very quickly once the thing is done sometimes.
A precipitous fall.
A precipitous fall. Word. Ah, nice. I don't know why that sounds lovely. I guess the word precipitous is like a pretty word. But yeah, I know. I'm thinking of like a waterfall. That's not lovely. Right? But, you know, it drops. And then we have this little recovery exhausted period where we're getting back to baseline. And this is just how it works universally for all of us. We follow this pattern. Now, again, these different stages are going to look different for everybody. What I may look like at my peak of stress might be very different than how Kate looks at her peak of stress. But everyone has a peak. Everyone has a ramping up. We all reach certain points. And it's one of those things where when it comes to riding the wave, don't get me wrong, like DBT has skills that very much help with this, where like when you are at your peak, what can you do? And a lot of DBT skills really target when you sense yourself ramping up, what can you do? tip can be very helpful when you are at your peak. For example, that's, I would say, the main one. But sometimes it happens where, when we reach the peak, we don't always stay there for very long. However, what happens when we are at our peak can have some pretty devastating consequences occasionally. And then we have this, I like how you put it, Kate, this adrenaline crash. And then we're left to deal with those consequences sometimes.
Yep.
So it can be too ambitious sometimes to expect that we can always intervene when we're at the peak, because it can be so rapid and so fast that we do the thing and then it's done. It's like, whoa, what just happened? This is where this idea of ride the wave is really just about recognizing that this is kind of the flow. And it doesn't mean that we are powerless. Well, I'm just going to reach my peak and this is what I'm always going to do. And this is what's going to happen every time, But when we anticipate that, then we can hopefully catch ourselves a little more in the ramping up before we get to the peak. And we can do something there so that we don't get to the peak and we start coming back down a little sooner. I'm going to pause here before I go into my personal sharing. Do you have anything else to add to this, Kate, or any thoughts about what I'm talking about?
I realize that, I think perhaps in oversights don't have a specific space in here where we describe as best we can, like the actual process of riding the wave, like what you might do physically, what, like, stuff like that. I don't, I can talk about that, you can talk about that. I just thought that might be probably a thing we ought to talk about at some point in there. Otherwise, no, I think neuroscience-wise, you got it pretty nailed.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point, because we are going to talk a little bit in the second part of the episode, basically, of what we recommend to help with riding the wave.
That's true. I guess I was thinking about, like, what to do, like, to help you do it, and not what is doing it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Maybe that's my, maybe I just didn't understand what you meant by that for the second half. So that's possible. It could just all be a big misinterpretation on my part, in which case we'd have gotten there and I've been like, oh, that.
No worries.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely at the end, if you feel like there's more to be said or things that we further need to address, I definitely want to, because this is very tricky. And it's going to be so individual to everyone, of like knowing what your warning signs are. And that was something we worked on a lot with the girls at Phoenix House. For some of the girls, it was like, I would see it when they would start to pace or get really restless, right? They would have a hard time sitting still. And this means they were ramping up about something. And it was like, okay, so what's the thing that we're going to intervene and do here so that they don't get to that point? I think I mentioned her before. She's the one who punched me in the arm, actually. And she would just pace the backyard. Circles, circles. I would be like, hey, go take a walk. Go take a walk. And she would. And that would typically, again, kind of prevent her from getting to the peak, because she'd already be coming down as she was taking
I guess it's a good question. Like, do you think of Ride the Wave as being a way to prevent reaching the peak, or being a way to make it through the peak?
That is a very good question. Yes to both. I think it's something.
No cheating.
Yeah, that is a little cheating. I just got something stuck in my throat.
Oh, no.
I'm okay. I think it is something where, again, depending on what your peak is, it can be helpful and good to know how to try to prevent yourself from getting there. But, I'm talking about pretty extreme peaks here, right? With the girls that I worked with at Phoenix House. It's a pretty extreme. If your peak is like, I'm going to physically assault someone, yes, like, let's intervene before that. But for some people, their peak is like, I'm going to cry. And that's their peak. Well, there may be a lot of benefit by allowing yourself to reach that peak and have that, and then let yourself come down naturally. Yeah.
That's so funny, because I thought I have sort of firmly had it placed in my head as a way to weather the peak without doing the thing. whatever the thing is. So in the case of some of your girls from Phoenix House, that would have been assaulting other people. I'll get into this more later, but in my particular case, that might have been self-harm, right? So it wasn't about not getting to the peak, but it was about getting through the peak without doing the thing.
Yeah, I guess it really can be conceptualized that way. Like, I almost imagine it as, like, you know, like if you're driving towards a cliff, then it could be like you take this, like, U-turn and you don't ever get to the cliff. Sure. Or it also can really be that, like,
brace. No, sorry.
Well, a little bit, but also just even like, you know, yeah, you're feeling your feelings the whole time. You're feeling it, but you're processing them differently. You're making a different choice so that even if you're feeling something really strongly, you're not doing the urge, whatever that is. And you might be noticing that you have that urge, but you're finding something else to get you through it, which is where like the urge surfing term comes from in regards to the skill of like, we have these urges and how do we not act on them and how do we just notice it and how do we maybe probably choose another DBT skill, maybe like accepts or something else to help us get through the urges so that we don't do that thing. I hope I'm not complicating it more. Maybe I am on accident. But yeah, I mean, I think it can really be viewed both ways. I think there could be a lot of benefits depending on what the peak is of people reaching the peak and seeing that the peak will not kill them and that they are okay and that they can get through that and it's all right. And I think there's also something to be said for like, if you are able to divert and not reach the peak and come down sooner, then you can still feel your emotions and be in them and riding the wave of them, but you're also making a conscious different choice while you're still experiencing the thing that you're experiencing.
Interesting. I think we might just be using slightly different terms to say the exact same thing.
That's what I'm kind of sensing.
I think I am thinking of something in the term, I'm thinking of it as going through the peak, and you're describing it as not, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully this makes sense, listeners. We're too far in now to back out. And hopefully it'll make sense when we talk about this personally.
Yeah.
That would also be the goal. Which admittedly, like we're going to talk about it in two very different ways. So the way that I'll talk about how I've seen this come up for myself, excuse me. Yeah, Kate and I just ate lunch. The way that I'm going to talk about this for myself is like, I've kind of always had perfectionistic tendencies throughout my whole life. Always. I think a lot of that comes from being a dancer. Dance is a very perfectionistic activity. You are always striving to do better. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think I've taken a very perfectionistic approach to my emotions. In the sense of either, like, I am so busy and distracted and doing a lot of things that I'm just not creating space for myself to be and to feel them and to experience them. I'm just kind of constantly putting them on the back burner. Back burner that, back burner this, don't have time to think about that, don't have time to deal with this. That I don't think I really, growing up, gave myself a lot of opportunities to ride the wave. To actually feel my feelings, to actually allow myself to reach a peak, to actually release, to actually, I didn't very much. I really didn't. A lot of times for me, the peak would look like crying. I think that's what it looks like for a lot of people. It depends on the emotion, right? But I cry when I'm angry. I cry when I'm sad. I cry. Crying is like my main thing. So, right, there's kind of this ramping up of like, you can feel the tears behind your eyes sort of a thing. And then there's the actual releasing of it. And when the tears are actually falling, that's probably when I'm at my peak. And I see it with clients all the time. People are absolutely terrified to get there. Terrified to let themselves cry, terrified to reach the peak and to see what that means and to feel the thing and to be with the thing. People just don't want to do it. And I would sometimes when I was younger, but it was a lot of times like in private before bed, I would store things up all day long and I just wouldn't really let myself feel or acknowledge my emotions very much because I probably really do deep down hold this myth that like feeling emotions is a sign of weakness or something like that. Like I definitely think I very much feel that way, or also just that like emotions are problems to be solved. That's probably a myth too of like, okay, so I feel something
and stop.
Yeah, and then how do I make it stop? Like, how do I make it go away? What are the boxes that I need to check or the things that I need to do so I don't feel mad anymore, so that I don't feel disappointed anymore, so that I don't feel anxious anymore?
What your emotions come down to a checklist too?
Dude, this is my programming.
Yes, Michelle's all about the checklist. For those who don't know this,
yeah,
and checklist human.
Yep, and I really don't think I honestly started to work on this a lot until I started therapy 4 years ago.
Well, sure, yeah.
And going through the group therapy experience that I went through really helped because it's all about getting you to the peak of your emotions. It really is.
Ooh, okay.
In the hypnotherapy work that I've done, where you are, in this trance state, a common release is to hit, like, they have a punching bag on the floor, and they give you, like, this, they call it a hose, but it's kind of a flexible, it's not as flexible as, like, a pool noodle. It looks like a very small pool noodle. I don't know what it's made out of, because I don't know very well what materials are. But anyways, you hit the bag with this hose. And it's this energy release. And you can scream and you can cry and you can whatever it is. But you are at that peak and you release. And then almost like as soon as you do it, you do feel that exhaustion kick in practically immediately. But it was all about everything that I did at those group weekends was just feeling the peak of your emotions as much as you could feel them. And seeing that it won't kill you. Like, you're okay. You can release that. You can feel that. And it's healthy. And then you would do that and you come down. And we did a process around, like, releasing shame. That basically, like, it brought your shame up to, like, a level 10. And you just kind of had to sit in it. And then, right, there was this coming down afterwards of, like, all right, and now how do we, come through that so that we don't stay there. But I've had to learn. I think what I'm trying to say in all this is that I've had to learn how to let myself get to the peak of my emotions. I've had to learn that that's okay. Because when you grow up being chronically perfectionistic, as I have been, it's so easy to just try to, honestly make emotions go away as soon as you feel them. And even though I grew up in a household where, my parents did a lot of things really well, I would say when I was growing up, I was never shamed for crying or that kind of a thing. It was very much like the minute that you felt something, you went and you dealt with that emotion kind of a thing. Like, if I was having a hard day, okay, go have a good cry and then come back kind of a thing. But it was very much just like, all right, go feel your emotion and then it'll, it wasn't really this sense of our emotions are with us all the time. We're always feeling them.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, so as soon as you feel an emotion, go do whatever you need to do to deal with it. Kind of. And not even so much in a shame way. I think my parents were really trying to be helpful in that regard of just kind of like, I had tools to deal with my emotions, I would say, but it was also just very much like, as soon as you felt something, you did the thing that you needed to do to get back to a state of joy. Because joy is where we're supposed to be all the time. So whenever you're feeling anger, whenever you're feeling sadness, just go take care of that and come back. Rather than recognizing, like, imagine how weird it would be. I'm just thinking of this with the ride the wave metaphor. Imagine how weird it would be if you're like standing on the shore of the beach and one wave comes in and then no more. Right? Like we're used to like a wave comes in, it goes back out. A wave comes in, it goes back out. Like it's this steady rhythm. It's this steady cycle. Yeah. And it was almost this idea of just kind of like, oh, so a wave is coming in, deal with that, and then no more waves will come. That's sort of an idea. And it's like, no.
Not quite how it works.
That's not quite how it works. Exactly. So for myself with this idea of ride the wave, I've had to go through this process of not treating my emotions like they are a problem to be solved, recognizing that they are with me at all times. I can reach the peak. And that's okay. And that it's healthier to reach the peak than to try to constantly stop myself from getting there, which is what I did for a lot of my life because I didn't want to show the emotions and I was scared of reaching the peak. And so I've had to do a lot of work there. So that's my stuff around this.
Oh, Michelle.
And now we're going to get to Kate's side, which is very different than mine.
Occasionally, I love listening to Michelle because I'm like, oh, there are healthy people.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I really have been fortunate to grow up in, by and large, a pretty healthy household. By and large, I was going to say like trauma-free, which I don't know if anyone is trauma-free, but...
Sure. Like big T trauma-free or something?
Yeah, for the most part, big T trauma-free, which I don't know if we should pause and explain what that means for listeners, but yeah, I mean, you and I have...
trauma, I guess.
Yeah, but you and I have very different life experiences. Mm-hmm. Very different.
So, one of the ways to illustrate that is Michelle was talking about her peak, looking like crying.
And Kate's peak looks like...
looks a little different. Let's see. Things that have shown up at my peaks. Well, the perennial problem starting, I don't know, depending on how you want to define things, somewhere between 11 and 14 was self-harm, specifically cutting. Certainly suicidality, only one suicide attempt. Also throwing things has happened an untoward number of times. There was the time I put my foot through a glass shower door. So Michelle's talking about like, I cry, and I'm like, oh fuck.
There's a range here, people. There's a spectrum. It's whatever your peak looks like for you.
I am here proudly representing those whose peaks might be a little more extreme. So that's what I'm talking about. And so for me, I really do connect more with the idea of urge surfing in this particular thing because I have urges. And there's a lot of reasons that I have gotten to those places. It took a long time in my own therapy before I realized that somewhere below I think I have a pretty damn intelligent and rational brain, there, way in the back, was hidden an idea that my emotions would literally kill me. Like actual death. If I let them just go. Right? They would literally kill me and or they would never stop. Right? Like if I just let this go, it would be a runaway train down an endless hill. And I was gone. I was a goner. And so cutting was my way of stopping the train. Right? I did not want, let's see, if we're using the wave analogy, I thought it would never crest and break. So I just wanted out of the water. And so that's what self-harm did for me. It basically short-circuited my entire emotional process. It just stopped it dead. Which is what I wanted at the time, but is not so much the healthy. So that's my biggest urge, and that's the thing against which I have struggled the most in my life when it comes to peaks and strong emotions. So for me, I have an incredibly distinct memory of the first time I really decided to do this. Unfortunately, it was a long time after I took DBT. I'm going to be honest. There was a lot of parts of DBT that helped me, but really saved my life in a lot of ways, and incredibly decreased my self-harm and things like that. But I was still, for many, many years after that, in a place where if things got bad enough, right? There was this my skills breakdown point, as DBT calls it. And what happened at my skills breakdown point was self-harm. So certainly going through DBT raised that bar, right? It used to be a much lower threshold until I was overwhelmed and turned to self-harm. So it raised that threshold considerably for me, gave me all sorts of ways to keep myself from getting to that threshold. I mean, it did a lot of lovely things. And
you still got there sometimes.
I still got there sometimes, and when I did, I self-harmed. And that was true well into adulthood, long after I took DBT at 19. So I remember, because it was not as long ago as one might hope, when I first really decided to just weather that urge. Just go through it. Have the feelings, and let the feelings come to their own natural conclusion. And I'm here to tell you, it was ugly. Really ugly. I was home alone, for which I am intensely grateful. Because there was a lot of screaming. There was an abundance of weeping to the point where I threw up repeatedly from the crying. It was ugly. I don't know. I try and be very transparent. I don't want people who might live more at my end of the spectrum trying to do this and be like, I'm crying so hard I'm gonna throw up. Clearly this isn't working. No, you're just having really big feelings. And that's okay. It's okay. It passed. It did pass. I'm here to tell you, it passed. I think the really ugly part was, I don't know, 15 minutes, but that included, the tail end of the ramping up and the peak and the beginning of the come down, right? There was kind of all of that process in those 15 minutes, but it passed. And that was the first time I was able to viscerally experience that my emotions wouldn't kill me, and also that they would stop. I didn't have to engage in this behavior to make this emotion go away, which was the myth that was pretty firmly implanted in me through my own behavior, more or less. Nobody came up to me like, hey, if you cut, that's the only that I learned that one, unfortunately, on my own. So that was my first experience with it. It's easier every time after that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I'm talking about things that I think can help this. But man, I just want to extend a tremendous amount of tenderness and understanding to the folks who hang out over here, where our emotions can result in some pretty gnarly shit, even if we don't give in to whatever our urge is. It's ugly crying. It's the snot down your face, choking on your own spit because you can't breathe right, hyperventilating crying, right? Like this, it's not pleasant. And I don't think I've ever felt more triumphant, more relieved, more, I don't know, awakened to something than I did after that happened. Because it's a thing, in my opinion, Michelle may have different opinions on this. In my opinion, it's not a thing you can learn through thinking. You can't tell yourself that the emotion will end. You can't tell yourself that this too will pass and have it sink into the same level as experiencing it does. Because I knew. I was, by the time this happened, I was in or past, at least in grad school for therapy. Like, I knew that emotions are a limited physiological process. The rational part of my brain absolutely had a handle on this fact. And that visceral place that we understand certain things did not. It was sitting back there in my brain with its arms crossed, looking at me like, yeah, right, bitch, whatever you say. Like, there was no belief. And that's one of the reasons to go through this, is because it's a way of viscerally teaching yourself in a way that no amount of talking or just thinking, I think, will do. And that's one of the reasons that it becomes easier every time, right? You'll start to gain that visceral understanding. What's another? I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase something. Oh, there you go. Like, I don't know, I talk about this a lot with clients around anxiety, but it can work with a lot of things. Anytime we avoid something, our brains, our bodies learn that they were correct to tell us to avoid it, right? Often this is anxiety telling us to avoid it, but it can be all sorts of other things. Mm-hmm. But if there's something we're like, I don't want to do that, right, is the first feeling, and then we're like, oh, you're right, let's not do that. Then our brains and body go, oh, cool, we were right. Do that more next time. And we can get ourselves into this real cycle of avoidance. And so we have to start teaching our bodies that they're wrong. We don't have to avoid this thing, right? That level of anxiety or that level of fear or that level of, whatever our emotionality is, doesn't have to be avoided. It's survivable. It may not be pretty. It may not be pretty. And it's survivable. So that's, my whole personal experience with this is around self-harm, I guess, and around teaching myself in that deep way that my emotions weren't going to kill me. They weren't going to last forever. And I could survive without self-harm. And that changed my relationship with self-harm more than almost anything I've had happen in the whole of my journey around it. Was just making it through that first time where I just laid on my bed and I decided, I was like, I'm going to stick this out. It was so unpleasant, Michelle. I get it.
Kind of imagining in my mind as you're talking about, I'm like, yeah, sounds rough.
Really rough. Now, there are few things I hate more in the world than vomiting under any circumstances.
Oh, that's me too. I hate
But vomiting because you're crying that hard, that just adds a whole nother level of fucking awful. So much empathy, right? For you folks that are out here listening, they're like, oh, you don't get it. You don't understand how big my emotions can get. I get it.
Yep.
I get it. I do. I get it. And I am here to tell you with literal personal experience that you can get it. You can get through it. You can survive it. So, yeah. I don't know. That's what I have to. I don't know what you'd have to add to that, Michelle, unless you have different thoughts on it.
Right. It's your life. It's your experience that you're speaking about. But I mean, just really you're acknowledging something that's really important, which is why I like teaching this skill again, which I struggle to call it a skill. It is, but it's so much of just kind of like, there is not necessarily a thing that you do.
It's a mindset in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it is a mindset. It's what you were describing. I'm just like, I am going to stick this out. I am at the peak, and okay. and I'm just gonna have to stay here for as long as I stay here, and I'm not gonna do the thing that I'm wanting to do.
Right? Be that, cutting or
drinking,
intoxication.
Yeah.
Yep. I was going to say, using drugs or alcohol.
It could be calling that person too. Like if you left a relationship, but you're like, oh my God, I want to talk to my ex, and you get to that peak where you're like, your fingers are about to dial that phone or like whatever it is, to be like, I'm not. And I'm going to just be here in this.
I'm just going to have the feelings.
Horrible, shitty place.
Yep.
So
because it will pass.
Yeah. It's like this strange conscious choice that's, again, very hard to make when you're at the peak. I just thought you spoke about your own experience with it really nicely.
Thank you. I don't know. I just want everybody who's listening to feel capable
Yeah.
of it. I am not going to tell you it's easy. I'm not going to tell you it's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
I am just going to tell you, you can do it, and man, are you going to feel good about yourself when you do.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, fuck yeah, after a nap. Oh, by the way, speaking of the crash, I napped for like 45 minutes when that was done.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
I passed the fuck out.
Yeah.
Like, my body was like, we are done for a while.
Yep.
So, yeah, after I napped, I felt very good about myself.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, what you said, like, really spoke to it, too, of, like, how I was saying earlier, like, we reach the peak, and if we do that thing at the peak, we can drop pretty quickly. So, right, like, if you reach that peak, and if you do cut, then you probably come back down pretty quickly of, like, okay, I cut, better, kind of a thing. And this is just being able to be like, and, yeah, I'm not going to drop as quick if I truly ride this wave. Like, I'm not going to drop. I'm going to be here for a while.
I'm going to be surfing for a bit.
I'm going to be surfing for a bit. I don't know when this is going to stop. And I just have to hang in there. And yeah, as you said, when you did do that, you know, your body went through its process. You did have that exhaustion period. It just looked very different than it would normally.
Yes.
So.
Yep. I allowed myself to have the whole process rather than short-circuiting it.
Yeah. Yep. Nice. Yeah. I think this is making some more sense now that we've shared a little bit more. Especially
Fingers
with you.
Crossed.
Yeah, especially with you sharing, right, like you said, it like kind of how the urge surfing can look with it. When you have a really strong, I want to do this thing, which, you know, my experience didn't speak to. I want to do this thing. I want to cut, you know, to be able to speak through working through it all.
And there's, you know, your brain will tell you that, you know, the cutting is the only thing, or, you know, fill in the blank here with your urge. This is the only thing that'll help. This is never going to end without it. This, you know, I don't know. Personally, you can also get to the, like, why not do it? Like, it's just other people telling you not to do it. They can go fuck themselves. This is my way of coping. Just also acknowledging that during that emotional stuff, there might be a lot of thoughts. Though, I will say that eventually I was emoting too hard to think. Turns out when you're crying so hard you're vomiting, there's not a lot of thinking.
Oh yeah, I doubt your prefrontal cortex was working very well.
No, there was not really any internal narrative. I would dip in and out of being able to have an internal narrative. When my peak was high enough, there was not even an internal narrative anymore. There were only the feelings.
Well, right, like fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
You know?
Only the feelings. And then it would dip a little bit and I'd have thoughts which would push me back up again, right? And that's how it took so long, really.
Yeah, totally. All right, so now, what can you guys do? Because, I mean, as I think what it was really illustrated in Kate's story here, of a lot of it is you wait. That's what you do. You wait. And also people would be like, okay, but like, what can help me wait? What can I turn to or try to do instead while I'm waiting? And I kind of think of this as like, how can you be with yourself in this really hard moment when you're at the peak? So the thing that I want to say, and then Kate's going to share her thoughts and ideas, but you know, this idea of how to be compassionate towards yourself. So, you know, it's like, I'm thinking about this with how Kate was talking about what she was going through. And if I had been there with you in that moment, Kate, like as your friend, and yeah, I mean, you're throwing up, you are crying. I mean, maybe at first I might have tried to like say something or but eventually I don't have a choice. I would just have to be there with you. I really would. Like, nothing else. There's nothing you can really say. You just have to be there. But I really think it is trying to think of how you can be like a compassionate friend to yourself in that moment. To not take a dump on yourself with your self-talk. As Kate said, this may certainly arise, because your brain's going to be trying to convince you to do the thing that you normally do. And your brain may say some not nice things to you, and how to really see if you are able to weed through all of that to be kind to yourself. Even if it's just saying, I'm doing my best. I'm trying to get through this. Some people love it. Some people hate it, that this too shall pass. So pick or choose that one if you like it or not.
Are there people that hate that? I love that.
I know some people who don't like that.
In the universe.
They feel like it very much minimizes. Because in the sense of like, right, sure, it'll pass, but you don't know. You don't know whether it's passing in 30 seconds or like 3 hours. Like, you don't know how.
Fair.
Or with like really big things in life, like say grief. I mean, grief is a never-ending process, as we've acknowledged, but sometimes people want to assign that phrase to things that, you know.
I think like this moment will pass, but sort of, but yeah.
Yeah, but like find a thing that works for you. You know, like a little.
No, that's just me musing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I like that. Like this moment will pass. Not like the stressful situation, it might stick around, but this moment may pass. Yeah. Of having just something you can try to say to yourself that gives you some encouragement to weather the storm that you are in that moment. Can be really helpful. I would recommend trying to think of something beforehand. When you are calm, to do some intentional thinking or reflecting of like, what would my mantra be? What would be something that would be really helpful for me to hear when I, you know, especially if you are struggling with a recurrent urge, an urge that comes up for you regularly. Like Kate, you know, could have done this where in a moment when she's not triggered, not panicked, to be able to say, what's the next thing that I want to try to think to myself when I'm, you know, wanting to cut, and to try to do some thinking of it beforehand, so then your brain's more easily able to draw on it in that moment. It still may be really hard to reach into the depths and find it, but it's more likely to be there if you've already thought it to yourself a couple times and landed on a phrase that is helpful. Kate's also mentioned this before, the idea of a self-compassion break. This is a moment of suffering. Others have suffered just as I am suffering. May I be kind to myself? I've been able to pull that one out recently in a couple moments of my own suffering, you could say. And
I'm not happy about your suffering, but I'm glad you pulled out the skill.
Yeah, it really does help, because you and I have both gone through. Kate did a mindful self-compassion course. I've done a mindful self-compassion course as participants, learning the mindful self-compassion skills. And it really does work. It's 3 simple sentences, but they are powerful sentences. So that can be something helpful to tell yourself while you're waiting for the urge to pass, is to have some kind of mantra or phrase you can tell yourself, perhaps on repeat. Or if there's a song that you like, start playing the song on repeat. Like something to give you some encouragement or some fortitude while you're in it is what I recommend.
I like it. So let's see, a couple of different thoughts. One is, so it also, this is going to depend on how strong your emotion is and how strong your urges is, etc. If you can, being literally grounded can help, right? Like have your feet flat on the floor, or like lay on the floor, or do something so that you're grounded on a very literal sense. Breathing exercises, right? Slow, deep breathing, you know, concentrating on breathing out for longer than you're breathing in. If the trigger is like a situation that you're literally in, if you're capable of stepping away, of not being in it anymore, that gives you a better chance, right? So there are some, I guess I would just say, really basic things to help yourself with weathering it. Now, eventually, I don't know if you're anything like me, the emotion may get to a point where you just, you are not capable of breathing exercises anymore. Like, or other things like that. In which case it's just, see you on the other side, my friend. Good journey. Right? Like, but, you know, if you're a little bit lower of a if you have lower peaks,
Mm-hmm.
or if you catch yourself earlier in the process.
Yeah.
Then doing things like getting grounded, doing breathing, some of Michelle's mantras also, or ones that you come up for yourself, a lot of these can be really helpful, especially in that early part of the process. And then I would say, it's so funny, my note just says practice, practice, practice. But really, every time you do it will be easier than the time you did it before. There might be a little bit of backsliding if you were doing it about one thing and then try it on a different thing, right? I don't know. It depends on how ingrained, how different your reasoning for the urges are, or how different the triggers are, or how different sort of your self-talk is around those different things. So, if you've done, practice 3 times around cutting, and then you try and do it for calling your ex, you may find that you're not as far along the process with a different urge. If you self-harm in multiple ways and you've been practicing one way, chances are, I would say that it will cross over very well to another way of self-harming. But yeah, practice if you can with ones that are smaller first, like every other DBT skill almost ever. Really, if you're able to practice it in less intense situations first, that's lovely. That's good. But just, do it a second time. And then a third. Because I will tell you that while that first time for me with the self-harm was, as I said, ugly, it doesn't look like that anymore. Like the urge is still there, sometimes as intensely as an urge. But I've taught my body that I can have emotions and they'll pass through, and that actually helps the emotions be less intense. Because part of what gets them so worked up was my own fear of them.
Right. They're going to be here forever.
Yeah, and so that just makes you panic on top of whatever you were already feeling, right? So I still have pretty fucking intense emotions, but less intense, and I'm not panicked about them, which just helps. So, practice, right? It really will get easier. And I guess the point of that is, if someone has a first experience like my first experience, I don't want them to be like, that wasn't actually better than the thing that I was avoiding. That was horrible, and I never want to do it again. It won't be that bad the second time. It may still be ugly, but less ugly.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, whatever your first experience is, it's not going to be that experience every time. I guess is really what I'm thinking there. So it makes it easier, because you're more practiced, etc. But it also makes it, I don't know how to put it. It literally is easier on your nervous system. Like, it just is. And so don't take experience numero uno as how it will look forever and always.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Very true.
Do you think we've managed to tell people what it actually is rather than just talking about?
Yeah.
Or how to do it rather than just talking about what it is or something?
No, yeah. I actually think we've done a pretty good job.
Good.
And I think it's important to name, as we've done, that, like, this is going to suck.
Yep.
It's gonna suck. and it's gonna suck whether you are on maybe the milder end of things like I was talking about, or whether you're on the more major end of things like Kate was talking about. Whatever your experience is, it sucks whenever we get to a peak and we have to stay there. Whatever the peak is for you, with whatever situation, it sucks in that moment. And Kate, just with you speaking so openly about your own experience, I think that really shows that, like, it can suck really bad. And that part of the process is letting it suck. Yep.
Learning you can survive the suck.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So in terms of homework, whether this comes up for you this week, you may be actively in the midst of trying to not do an urge as much. Whether that urge is self-harm, whether that urge is something with addiction. You may be really, and that gives a pretty clear example, I would say, of when you can try to use this skill, is if you have urges like that occur for you in your life. Even if you don't have urges that occur like that for you in your life, I would then encourage you to maybe think back on a little bit of what I was sharing, which, hey, we all feel emotions all the time. And if you recognize for yourself that there are certain emotions that you really try to stifle, for a lot of people, that tends to be anger. Anger is still one that I catch myself stifling a lot. Anger might be one, but whatever it is, if you just notice that as you're going through your day, there's an emotion that you're not letting yourself feel 100%. You're stopping it. You're not letting yourself express it the way that it might need to be expressed, or letting yourself feel it to the degree that you could feel it. This may very likely be something to just notice during this week for, I would say, nearly everyone. Mm-hmm. And to try to let yourself feel your emotion more, and to see what it means to reach the peak, and to be there, and to let yourself come back down whenever you come back down. So I feel pretty confident that for most, if not all of our listeners, there will be a chance to ride the wave this week, no matter whether it's kind of like a more urge surfing kind of wave, or just, I'm going to just try to feel my feelings a little more because I tend to shut them down kind of a wave. So, yeah.
Nice.
It's awkward self-promotion time.
Awkward self-promotion time.
Yippee. I'm going to start off by saying an awesome thing. Kelly, we're calling you out. Kate's sister, Kelly, decided to donate to our Patreon, which was very sweet. So, Kelly, here's your shout out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you want to say to her, Kate? She's your sister, after all.
About time. No. By the way, my sister and I interact. That's perfectly acceptable, I promise. She is a wonderful human being, mother of twins, all sorts of busyness. She was like, oh, I keep meaning to do that. So I get to tease her about it a little
Very
bit.
sweet of you, Kelly.
Thank you. Love
Thanks,
you.
Kelly. So yeah, anyways, Patreon. So if you want to donate to the Patreon, go to patreon.com/dbtandme and contribute. We would love it. Also check out stuff on Etsy, etsy.com, and search for DBT and me. I was kind of thinking this may be the inspiration for something about the suck, right? Like, I survived the suck or something like that. I don't know. I'll have to think on it a little bit. But maybe something around Ride the Wave could be fun that I'll think of making.
I like it.
So yeah, check out our Etsy shop and consider ordering something. And I'm totally blanking. Oh yeah, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, if that's where you listen.
And send us an email.
And emails, yep. dbtandmepodcast@gmail.com. I was like, there's something else besides the email. There's 4 things. What's the third thing? Oh yeah, that's what it is.
I still have to look at it in the written notes every time.
This is why we call it awkward self-promotion, everyone.
It's true. I feel like it'd be great if we had like a little sound we could play, like awkward self-promotion, diddly ding. I don't know, like
right?
That'd be hilarious to me. But
nice.
Need like a little bell. Okay. We're on to closing moment, aren't we?
Yeah, which, I mean, I don't want to speak to it too much because you're going to be the one to do it, Kate, but we're going to get, I guess, a little maybe mini practice here somewhat with riding a wave or imagining us doing it.
Basically, yeah. So, I mean, I'll drop into my usual tones of voice and everything else in a moment. But yeah, Michelle has the right of it. This is going to be very similar to Cope Ahead kind of idea if you've listened to that episode, which is to say, you know, we can do a decent amount of work without actually having to be in the situation. It's a limited amount, but it's an amount. And so today's closing moment is just going to be an imaginary walkthrough. And to see, so we can practice ahead of time. We can cope ahead of time. We can see ourselves doing this successfully.
Nice. So, all right, I'm excited.
Okay. As per usual, get comfy. Right? You could be sitting, standing, walking, laying down, whatever feels good to you in the moment. Just find some way that your body can be comfortable for the next few minutes. And if you're safe and comfortable doing so, go ahead and close your eyes. As usual, we're going to begin by just tuning into our breath.
You don't have to breathe any more slowly or any more deeply than you are naturally. And this is just about paying attention. And this is just about focusing in on the rhythm and the sensations of our breath and letting those welcome us into our body and into the present moment. So today, I'd like you to bring to mind a situation or a thing of some sort that is a trigger for you. Something that brings up a decently intense emotion. Now, I'm trusting your discretion here. Don't get yourself overwhelmed in this moment. But let it be something that's intense enough that you can feel. And take a moment or two, take a few seconds here. Really sink into that imagining of it. Really notice what thoughts start to percolate to the top of your head as you bring this to mind. Notice what sensations do you notice in your body? Where do you literally feel this as you bring the situation to mind? It can be anything from muscle tension to nausea, changes in your breathing, your heart rate, sweating, having to swallow a lot, having the urge to yawn, all sorts of things. Just take a moment and tune in. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings when you bring to mind this situation or trigger? And stick with it. We're going to let that intensify for a few seconds here. I want you to imagine, if you have it, the last time you went through this situation or trigger. What happened? How did that ramp up look and feel? How did you behave in that moment at that time? What actions did you start to take? This may have been an interpersonal interaction, so it may have been things you said or did to another person. It could have been something where you were alone. Whatever it was, I want you to remember what you started doing. This isn't the urge yet. This isn't at the peak. This is what were you doing and thinking and feeling as you were going up, as you were moving towards that peak of emotion. And now, perhaps predictably, I want you to imagine hitting that peak. I want you to try and bring as much as you can into your body and into your mind right now, the full brunt of that feeling, whatever that emotion is, the full brunt of the urge without imagining taking the action. What we're doing here is practicing doing this successfully. So anything else that you might picture yourself doing, or if you're listening and you're in a place where you can, maybe you can do it. If this is bringing you to tears, then cry. If you want to yell about something and you can, yell about it. All of these things are okay, so long as you're not engaging in that urge, either literally or in your imagination. Or, if for you there's no urge attached to this, simply imagine that feeling coming to its full bloom. Its total effect living in your body and in your mind right now. Imagine what that could feel like. Physically, mentally, how your body would respond, what thoughts you would have. If you just let yourself have the feelings. Nothing more and nothing less. Spend a moment there. And now we're going to imagine that beginning to fade. Maybe you've cried yourself out, literally or in your imagination. Maybe you have screamed, maybe you have punched the pillows, whatever it is that you have done to have the feeling and or to express it healthfully. And now we're going to begin to feel it draining out of our bodies. This would be a good time to take some slow, deep breaths. You might also, if you're a visual person, imagine it literally draining out of your body, seeping out from you, slowly but steadily, like water going down a drain. Don't be too quick to fill back up again on the back end of this. Allow yourself to be a little bit empty for a moment or two here. Let yourself hang out in that space of being drained. It's okay to be there too. We don't have to distract ourselves immediately. We don't have to fill ourselves back up again immediately. Just as there was space for the ramp up and for that full bore emotion, there's also space for the void that's left after it. So take a moment to spend your time there too, to appreciate that relief and that emptiness. When you've had a couple of moments there, I would more than usual urge you to do a little bit of gentle stretching. Continue with some deeper breathing while you actively and intentionally put that experience away. Let go of the thought of the trigger, let go of the emotions that came to mind. Try and let those thoughts pass. And try and let your body come back into this room and in the moment. And that's what the stretching is meant to help you do. Reminded of where it actually is and what it's actually doing. Take it out of the imagined and into the real. Take as long with this process as you feel like you need or want. But whenever you are ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each